All right, well, let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, thank you, Lord, for your word. Thank you for the wisdom that it gives us, Lord, in particularly these wisdom books that take your truth and distill it into very practical lessons for life. Lord, we pray that we would be blessed in considering your word tonight, in hearing from you in it. Father, also seeing something of you and your character in the midst of your word. Father, show us yourself. Give us understanding. Help us to relate these probably more familiar books to the broader theme and movement of the Old Testament. We pray that, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, wisdom writings, Proverbs. What do you know about Proverbs? Get me started by finding out what you know. What do you know about Proverbs?
Mostly written by Solomon.
How many Proverbs did Solomon write? Or spoke? Like 3,000? In 1 Kings, I want to say 1 Kings 4, something like that, yeah. 432, there it is, yes. A lot of Proverbs and a lot of songs. And so we have some of those Proverbs and some of those songs here. And it's kind of hard to say, well, how much of these would be that collection? Because are we talking just every couplet is a proverb? Or sometimes more of an extended section is a single proverb? We typically tend to think of the Proverbs as the chapters that they're divided in for us. But that came long after Solomon. So originally you had the collection, and the various sections of the collection were just outlined or divided by the headings that are included along the way. Like these are the Proverbs of Solomon collected by the scribes of Hezekiah or the men of Hezekiah. That would be a separate section from some of the others. And so we did not have the chapters originally. The Proverbs, think of the Proverbs as practical, helpful statements of the character of the law. This is the law of God for the people of God, not for lawyers, but for life. So the lawyers would study Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and then they would sift that with a fine-tooth comb, and they would add safety fences around that. Well, this would be violating Moses and Deuteronomy here. So we're gonna require people to do something even further out than that, so that they don't come close to violating the actual commandment. Proverbs are not intended to give you a right or wrong in the sense of, oh, you violated the law there, see? You broke the rule. Proverbs are intended to be practical statements that express the righteousness of the law in ways that are helpful for living, in ways that are memorable. The Proverbs are poetry, Hebrew poetry. Doesn't mean that they rhyme. What do we mean when we talk about Hebrew poetry? What's the characteristic of Hebrew poetry? You probably dealt with this some in the Psalms.
Some of it is compare and contrast.
Mm-hmm. There are parallelisms in the Hebrew poetry. It's a parallel not of sound so much as of sense. So parallel sense. So there will be a synonymous parallelism, and there will be an antithetical parallelism. There's another one, I can't think of the right name for it, but it's one that it says the same kind of thing, but it then takes it further or gets even more specific. Or sometimes you'll start specific and then you'll get a little more general in the next line. But they complementary. I think it's a complementary. So there's two different ways of basically saying the same thing. There's saying something and then going a little further with it. There's making a statement and then giving the contrast of that. Do this and you will live, well, do that and you will not live, for instance. So those parallels, you will see, that kind of rhyme of a parallelism of sense, you'll find. I think Proverbs were compiled originally, or Solomon's Proverbs, where we see, I mean, Solomon's a really wise guy, right? And yet what happens? he does really foolish things along the way, and especially later in his life. And it's like if he'd only read his own Proverbs, if he'd only followed his own first 9 chapters, this didn't have to happen. So I take it, I don't have a lot of basis for this, so you can come to another conclusion, but I take it this is a little earlier in Solomon's reign. God gave him much wisdom. And fortunately for all of us, he also gave him the wisdom to write these things down, or to have these things recorded, that they could be handed down from one generation to the next. So I've done a little breaking down of the Proverbs into, and actually I didn't break this down. I adapted a outline that I got from, I meant to give you where this came from. Did I not do that on the paper? No, I did not. Dyer and I forget the other guy. Charles Dyer and somebody else have an Old Testament survey that is done by Thomas Nelson Publishers. So it's a Nelson's Old Testament survey, and that's where this outline of Proverbs comes from. I adjusted a little bit. I combined a couple of things that I thought they were just getting a little too nitpicky about. But interesting, the way that they really divided out the first 9 chapters of Proverbs into a lot of detail. There's a lot of topics there. Let's jump into that initially. First of all, there's a purpose given for the Proverbs in the first 7 verses. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, the king of Israel. Okay, so at least for the next 9 chapters, we know our source. And here's the purpose: to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to perceive instruction in wise dealings, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to give knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and fools despise wisdom and instruction. So there's the purpose, to give wisdom, to give understanding, to give insight, practical righteousness, wise dealings in life. That's what we should expect to find here. In fact, all facets of life and all kinds of relationships are discussed in Proverbs. There are a lot of people that have a pattern of reading Proverbs. Have you ever come across that? A pattern of reading the Proverbs regularly? I remember, man, years ago, read a proverb a day. You forget where you are, you just look at the calendar, and that's where we'll be again today, and just keep going. Yeah, because they're just that practical, and different verses out of that chapter would stand out to you at different times, of course, but very, very practical. There's an emphasis on practical for those who are young, for the youth, to give knowledge and discretion to the youth before they really sometimes are very well practiced by having good sense and experience of life, to be given patterns that they can follow, and that there's safety in those patterns. That's part of the intention here. Now, in verses 8 and 9, it's interesting. It seems to be addressed, my son, your father's instruction. Now we probably can't make too much of that because, yes, Solomon sought to instruct his sons, but also that was a pattern, the sage to his learners, that it would be expressed in father and son. That was common in the Egyptian Proverbs from 1,000 years earlier. So the Hebrews are not the only one to do Proverbs in the Old Testament era. In ancient times, a lot of cultures had Proverbs. We have the benefit of the Hebrew Proverbs in particular. But there's other Proverbs that you've probably heard here and there. Confucius says this, and so on. Same kind of thing. A plea to hear. Hear, my son, your father's instruction. Forsake not your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. This is your decoration. This is your honor. You don't need the bling of a big gold chain, son. What you need is wisdom in life. What you need is to make good decisions and to live out godly character. And that will matter far more than the clothes that you're wearing or the wealth that you obtain. Now, as you look at the further outline in that first section, A through P, what do you see that continues to pop up there?
Adulteress.
Adultery and warning of the adulteress. That occurs like 4 different times. That just keeps coming back up. It seems to be a thing. And I look at our culture today, and we are in a highly sexualized culture. And I don't know how high school boys in particular, but high schoolers in general survive today in this kind of environment. Our culture is intentionally ruining. And this is a warning that's particularly given father to son or sage to learner 4 times. In chapter 2, the first warning about the adulteress, don't go her way. And in chapter 5, it comes up again after talking about several other things: the value of wisdom, being kind to others, family instruction, beware of bad company. Bad company corrupts good morals. Watch your step. But then again, a warning about the adulteress. Other advice, and then again, a warning about the adulteress in chapter 6, and again in chapter 7. Then a contrast of wisdom and folly. So that's a big deal. This is a concern of the aged to the novice, or particularly the father to the son, whether it's a family relationship or a learning relationship. It's a big deal, and it's probably, what do we gain out of that? What do we get from that? What conclusions would you offer? Is Solomon just hooked on sexual topics? Is he just thinking too much about adultery because of how he himself is going to act out? What do you make of this?
I'd say he's identifying a common problem.
Something God gave us for relational intimacy in marriage and for the perpetuation of humanity in spite of our own stupidity. He gave us this desire, and yet it is so easily twisted. And it's a strong and powerful force. And like a river that overflows its banks, or like electricity when it gets outside of its proper conductors, what is very useful and powerful becomes very, very dangerous and deadly. And so yeah, this is something to pay attention to, and needs to be talked about. What else do you see in there that stands out in those first 9 chapters in those headings?
What about wisdom?
It's interesting, chapter 3 seems to pick up on a thought of verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. This comes back to an introductory statement that I did get from my friends in that other Old Testament survey that I referenced. There's 3 theological themes that seem to be circling here. A syllogism, or a logical pattern. The major point, then a minor point from that, and thus the conclusion. Humans are mortal. I am human, therefore I am mortal. That would be a very simple example of a syllogism. Well, what you find in Proverbs a lot is this kind of a pattern. The secret of a happy, meaningful, fulfilled, effective life is found in wisdom and practical application of its principles. Living wisely, practicing wisdom. There's happy, meaningful, effective life. Now, wisdom comes only from knowing and confessing God as its source. Therefore, conclusion 3, a person must seek after God with all of his or her being in order to be wise and enjoy wisdom's benefits. Which circle back around to a happy, meaningful, effective life is wisdom's benefits. So that's a pattern that reoccurs, and so the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Because something else you'll find in Proverbs, let's now think bigger. What's the purpose of the Old Testament? What would you say, just generally? This is not a test. This is not, I gave you this as a right answer once and you got to come up with it again. What do you see as God's purpose in the Old Testament? I'm sorry? Okay. God is revealing our need for redemption. The Old Testament is revelation. It is special revelation from God. God is revealing. God reveals our need of redemption. God is revealing His own character to us. He as creator, we as created. And in relationship with Him, until that all falls apart very quickly in the 3rd chapter. And then the storyline moves along in God's redemptive purpose. But in all of God's redemptive purpose, in His covenant relationship with Israel, Israel lives with God in a covenant. And in that covenant relationship, they are learning and understanding God. Even when they fail, even when they experience God's chastening, when they experience famine, when they experience defeat in battle, when they ultimately experience exile out of their land, what are they learning or knowing or understanding about God? Okay, that they need Him, that His ways are best. His ways are the way to goodness in life, even in this broken creation. That God is faithful to His covenant. When we are unfaithful, yet God abides faithful. He cannot deny Himself. That's a New Testament statement that Paul gives to Timothy, and yet it's true of God in the Old Testament. That God is true to His covenant, even when His people are not. That it will cost them, and yet He will restore them. So that whole flow in this covenant relationship of God continuing to be consistently who He is according to His character. Now, what does Proverbs add to us in terms of our understanding of the character of God? To think through, again, some of these different categories. If I can slip it the right way, are we going the right way? Good, okay. So the kind of things that are included there.
We have a choice as how we respond. God doesn't change. He will still love us, but...
Right. God doesn't change. We can be very fickle, by the way, but we are fickle, God is faithful. Yeah, and so the characteristics of do this brings these blessings, doing that is going to bring heartache, because God is very consistent. He can be relied upon and counted upon. We can count upon Him. Thus we can trust Him. God is trustworthy. God will be consistent. He will be who He is. We can count on it. That God also is wise. He is the wonderful counselor, or the wonderful advocate. He is the extraordinary strategist. He is the ultimate wise man. God is the sage of the universe. His way will always be better. And I think all of us are a little older, and we have had kids that were younger than us. Not surprising. And those kids younger than us have grown up a bit along the way, and some things they've done well, some things they've done foolishly. And we were old enough by that time to know that they were in the midst of foolishness. They didn't listen to us still, but we knew that was foolish. Now take that and multiply that exponentially, and you have something between God and His relationship with His children. He is wise, and He knows the best way for us. Understanding Proverbs as a practical expression of the righteous character of the law expressed practically for life rather than for lawyers. If we think of Proverbs that way, then what does the focus on the adulteress and the warnings, the father-son warnings against the adulteress and participating in adultery because of the danger of that, the death of that? Why is that such a big deal to God? Because God is very uptight about our sex lives?
He loves us.
He loves us? He knows the harm, but also there's something about the very character of God there. That God is faithful. God is faithful, and this is the exact opposite of faithfulness. So one of the things that when we live into the Proverbs, when our lives begin to practice this sage wisdom, it's not merely there's a transactional relationship with God going on, that we do the things God wants and He's going to reward us for it. Here's a cookie. It's much deeper than that. It's knowing God experientially. It's stepping more into His character. And in stepping into and following His character, we know Him. Okay, so you really get a detailed breakdown in those first 9 chapters, but we should move on. Coming from chapter 10, now we have, okay, these are the Proverbs of Solomon. And we get that again out of the heading in chapter 10, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon. Wait a minute, I thought the other ones were the Proverbs of Solomon. Yes, they were too. This is just another division. And they've all then been redacted or compiled together. And these are not his statements to his own son necessarily at this point now, but these statements are going to be characterized as more general. A wise son makes his father glad, but a foolish son. There's that antithetical parallelism. Treasure gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. There's profit. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but He thwarts the cravings of the wicked. You see the hunger, the cravings, you see the parallel that keeps ringing true here. And what's the advantage of the poetry? Why are Proverbs expressed poetically in these parallelisms, these contrasts or these comparisons, do you think? Makes it easy to teach and remember, yeah.
They didn't have books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have a very oral culture. And so they remember the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They remember the stories of Passover and deliverance out of Egypt. So you tell stories. Narrative is very important. But to take these little nuggets of truth and cause them to stick. Yeah, you put it in nice little pithy sayings that you learn one at a time. And you get that one locked away, and then you learn another one. Get that one locked away, and you keep adding to it. And the more you can not only know them and recite them, but live in light of them. And the parallels help you to unpack the meaning and extend it more broadly. Oh, let's see. Anybody have a favorite proverb that they'd like us to turn to and notice? Okay. Yeah, there's an interesting connection there. Genesis 3, 5, and 6, of course, there is the fall, right? And in fact, let's go back there. Genesis 3, 5, and 6. What was I poking at there? God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil, trusting in your own understanding, your own judgment. And so the woman looked and she saw and she determined and she chose. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, your own perspective, your own assessment. In all your ways acknowledge Him, acknowledge God as God. God is God and we are not. And He will make your paths straight. And that's what they did not do. Yeah, interesting. I don't want to put too much in the chapter and verse sometimes when things line up that way. Like there are other places you can trace 3:16, and it's also a wonderful verse. And I don't want to make too much of that. But it's nice to stumble across such things. And it's another way that it helps it stick with us, doesn't it? You know. Yeah, that was one in particular, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, that was really kind of rehearsed into Julie and I at Grace Bible Church by some of our leaders there. That it was a favorite for them, and we gained that from them. So there's a living out of practical righteousness in all kinds of relationship. Avoiding bad company in chapter, well, I'm back in chapter 4 to 9 now. Let's move forward again. In just all kinds of relationships, the dealings of the righteous versus the wicked, the deceit and what comes out of that. Chapter 11, a false balance is an abomination, but a just weight. The integrity of their upright guides them. The crookedness of the treacherous will destroy them. Riches don't profit. So you can see kind of some similar themes working through there, how to live in terms of economic success. Chapter 12 is a little bit different. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. Whoever hates reproof is stupid or foolish. We get to all the way to chapter 22, and we have now a collection of the sayings of the wise. Chapter 22 from verse 17. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to my knowledge. And so now the tone changes a little bit. It's not quite the same kind of meter back and forth of the previous couplets. It's another section has started. Interestingly, in chapters 25 to 29, you have a collection by the men of Hezekiah. Let's see how that is introduced. These also are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. Now let's read a couple of these. Verse 2. It's glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out. God knows everything. But kings are to search things out. The heart of kings is unsearchable. Verse 5, take away the wicked from the presence of the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Verse 8, don't hastily bring into court for what you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame. Argue your case with your neighbor himself. Verse 15, with patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone. Dealings with enemies in verse 24 of chapter 25. Verse 25, like cold water to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. Who is more likely to receive good news from a far country? The king, a ruler. These proverbs collected by the men of Hezekiah, perhaps they are collected for Hezekiah. These seem to be a section of wisdom for rulers in particular. So when we're thinking of leadership, for instance, we want to focus in leadership and leadership development among our elders and future elders, we would be looking, well, you can look at all the Proverbs, but you can also look at certain ones in particular that are focused on these were assembled, these seem to be gathered together for leaders. Hezekiah seemed to gain something from them. And Josiah probably benefited from them as well. Probably some of those bright spots in Judah's history came as a result of applying themselves and turning their hearts again toward God's wisdom. And yet Hezekiah's son Manasseh turns very quickly away, doesn't he? And would be described as the foolish man instead. There's the words of Agur in chapter in chapter 30, and we really don't know who he is. He's the son of Jacob. We don't know who Jacob is. We don't know who Lemuel is, except there's a young man in our church named Lemuel, after Lemuel, but we don't really know who Lemuel is either. Lemuel seems to be a king, King Lemuel. We don't know king of who. We don't know if that's another name for one of the kings. Maybe it's the name that his mother called him. There's a lot there that we just don't know. There are a lot of theories out there. Some of the people will give a theory very adamantly. Well, it's like this, clearly. And, well, okay. But we really don't know who Lemuel is. Hasn't been revealed to us. I guess it's the glory of a king to search that out. So the closest thing we have to a king here tonight is our elder chair. So Daryl, that'll be up to you. Now, many people would separate out verses 1 to 9 as the words of King Lemuel. And then chapter 10 and forward, that description of a good and godly wife, the culmination of the book, but not necessarily by Lemuel. That could be back to Solomon's Proverbs again. Which would be a little ironic then to take 10, if 10 is from Solomon rather than from Lemuel's mother. An excellent wife, who can find? Well, he certainly tried, didn't he? He kept looking and trying. Surely in all this I'll find one. Hard to explain. Any other thoughts about the Proverbs? Things you wanted to ask about, things that were talked about in the book that they're familiar to us, very useful to us, and don't feel like, it's not a book to try to, okay, what's the big picture is, this has got practical expressions of the law of God, the character of God, but for real life, in practical terms rather than legalistic terms. It's another way to think about, one of the things that helps me as well, if I say this a slightly different way, is that a lot of times we can get caught up in the law of measuring ourselves, were we guilty or innocent? Did we violate that or not? And that's not the purpose of Proverbs. Proverbs is not written that way. It describes the same kind of righteousness, but in calling us to follow along and live it out in practical ways, rather than worried being focused on the letter of the law.
So the process of sanctification.
Yes, yes. Sanctification is described here, and yet it's fuzzier. It's a little more ambiguous. A little more generalized, and yet probably in many ways so much more helpfully practical. In ways that you didn't need the rabbi to tell you how far to stay back from the fence. Yeah. Rather you can just focus on the wisdom that the law provides. And that brings us to Ecclesiastes. Where does Ecclesiastes get its name? Why is it called Ecclesiastes? What a strange name.
That's what's called the predicator, preacher.
The preacher, yeah. Yeah, so that's where it comes from. Ecclesia is the church or the congregation. Those preach to. So the preacher is preaching to the congregation. Okay. Now, if Proverbs is early in Solomon, then maybe Ecclesiastes is later. I like to think of Ecclesiastes as Solomon old and full of regret. Now again, we can't nail that down. Some would say it's the wisdom of Solomon, but expressed by somebody considerably later than Solomon. Some people would come back around and say, well, a later writer was writing as if they were Solomon. We call that a pseudepigrapha, a false writing. That the person who's writing it, it's kind of like the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas is clearly a 2nd to 3rd century writing, and yet it's portrayed as if it was written by the disciple Thomas in the 1st century. It's a pseudepigrapha. But the problem with pseudepigrapha, though it became a little more popular later after the time of the biblical writers, it was never, that false writing was never received in the era of the biblical authors. Like in the 1st century, nobody supported. Paul had a problem of people writing a letter and signing it as if it was from him. He describes that. And he says, see with what large letters I have written in my own hand, because this is really from me, and you know the way I write. And so that was a problem, but it was a problem of imposters and false teachers. It wasn't an accepted way that the church used in order to teach, or that the Hebrews of the Old Testament used in order to continue and teach God's truth. And it kind of fits. The Hebrews had a very high value, those that were of faith, had a high value of God's word. In fact, they wouldn't even speak God's name. One of the reasons we have reference to the Most High is you dare not say His name, because you don't want to potentially say it in vain. They had a very high regard then for God's truth, and they would never misrepresent it. They would never pretend to be a prophet whom they weren't, for instance, or in this case, a king. So Ecclesiastes, probably written by Solomon, and probably later in life. Now, how would you describe Ecclesiastes? Now, Debbie, you had an expression there. Unpack that for me. A bummer. Okay? Seems like kind of a poor outlook on life, huh? Kind of discouraging, disappointing outlook on life. Okay? Key word? Vanity or futility. It's all futile. What will be, you can't do anything about it. I remember being surprised when we moved to Swaziland. As I got to know the Swazi men that I worked with, I realized that they had, many of them, even Christian men, still had kind of this fatalistic view of what would be in life. That they didn't have an optimistic and entrepreneurial, take dominion, let's seize the day and let's make and build something. Let's make it happen. We've got this. There was much more of it's not up to me. I could try as hard as I wanted. And where that came out of was actually the influence of African traditional religion, the spiritism that understood that there's a spiritual world, an unseen world above us, but all around us, that they're the ones that actually control what's going on. We are mere mortals. We may think we are in control of things, but they're the ones that are in control, and we are merely pawns in their game. So nothing I do really matters. Now, that Christian Swazi man would not express it that way, but some of that mindset still kind of hung over them from the influence of the culture that they had grown up in. And Solomon, it seems like, out of the experiences of his life, and even what he describes, the searching and not finding, it comes across that way. Now, is that the meaning of the book, and what do you do with that? What do you do with Ecclesiastes in terms of the Word of God? Is life really that futile?
Without God.
So, if Solomon has, in a sense, a wise man and yet has, in a sense, lost his way, an old man full of regrets, he knows where he took the wrong turns. He knows where he got off the train and he shouldn't have, but it's too late to go back. He cannot return and relive those years differently. What's done is done, what's gone is gone. And yet, he still has enough, and there's a natural wisdom and processing of the experiences of life that do come to a much more hopeless conclusion if this is all there is. And that leaks out in his statements. So think of Ecclesiastes, I think that's a healthy way to think of it, is the expression of life without reference to God. Life without God looks like this. It's the Rolling Stones. I can't get no satisfaction. I tried and I tried and I tried and I tried, and I can't get no. That's Ecclesiastes. And he tries it in the same way that the Rolling Stones tried it. He goes back to the house of the adulteress. He's tried to find it in the pleasures of women. He's tried to find it in seeking pleasure and hedonism and in the pursuit of wealth. And he doesn't find it. It doesn't satisfy. He finds himself making money and putting into pockets with holes in it. Is another way that's described elsewhere. And so there's a circle of life described in chapter 3. After we've had the first run of it, there's the futility in wisdom. I thought I would learn, I would understand all mysteries and all knowledge. And yet it was futile. And what is crooked cannot be made straight. By learning and understanding and technology and insight, we cannot fix the problems of humanity in the world. We can't make it right. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be counted. Now, is that true? What is crooked cannot be made straight? Without God, it cannot. Yes. But with God, it can. And one of the things that statement does for me is if I take that as a true statement of human capacity and reality, then that makes the wonderful redemptive work of Jesus all the more amazing. That He is able to restore what was broken. He's able to return what was lost. He's able to make the lame to walk again. What's crooked can be made straight. And it makes our redemption all the more remarkable. In verse 18, in much wisdom is much vexation. What does that mean? He who increases knowledge increases sorrow. What does that mean? The more you know. Yeah, it's like, hey, can you explain it to me? No, you really don't want to know. I find myself in current events and news. I can spend way too much time there, and it is not good for me. It doesn't help my outlook. I like to understand. I like to know what's going on, and why are people doing this, and what are they up to, and what do they think that's going to achieve, and how's that going to work out? I love the strategy of it all, and yet to see the kinds of things, and it can be very discouraging to dig into that and to give too much attention to it. Because, oh my goodness, yes, it is a mess. Okay, so there's the futility of overall of life without reference to God. Seeking to find then fulfillment in pleasure and wealth, and you don't find it there. You don't find it in self-indulgence. It seems like living wisely and working hard. Well, that ought to be the answer, shouldn't it? Live wisely and work hard. What's wrong with that? That's good advice. How does that fall short in chapter 2? I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. What can man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Saw there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. So wisdom seems to be much better than folly. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said to my heart, what happens to the fool will also happen to me. Why then have I been so very wise? What has it gained me ultimately?
Think a better life.
Okay. And then you die. Somebody said the message of Ecclesiastes is life stinks and then you die. On that cheery thought, let's have another grape, shall we? Yeah, it's a pretty negative view. For of the wise, verse 16, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. Wow, I understand it differently. I understand that this is merely the beginning. These are merely the training grounds, that all of our future eternity remains before us to anticipate and to lean toward. But otherwise, 17, I hated life, because what is done under the sun is grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after wind. Toiling under the sun in hard work, and then you leave it to a man who comes after you. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. And everything that you worked so hard for, what will remain of it? Something I've watched. I've watched this in Christian education institutions in particular. that there will be a generation that works hard to build. And it's been a hard slog all the way, and there's been sacrifice, not only in those who are leading and building and teaching, but those who are coming along and participating in the learning in the early generation. And it's hard work, and there's sacrifice involved. And the next generation comes, and it's a lot easier by then. Things are in place, things are together, it's working pretty well. By generation number 3, it was all given to them. They never tasted any of the sacrifice of it, what it took to build. And that's where it goes sideways. That's where it begins to fall apart. And more often than not, sometimes there's a slip, there's a slide, there's a move off, and then there's a correction and it's brought back again. But often is the case that by the 3rd generation, what was built is lost. And those who came after were fools rather than wise. And he's put his finger on that. But it's far more common than we would realize. And if I were to get political just for a moment, one of the breakdowns of our process today is we're in a country that was meant for the citizen legislature. That people would take their turn, wise people, esteemed among their population, would take a turn in the decisions of government and then return to their home and their work and their business or their estate. They would go and they would serve and they would come again and return. The idea of a career politician who has never held a job outside of government employment, that was a foreign thing to our founders. I don't think they actually anticipated that that would occur, that that would be anyone's chosen career path. And yet that's where we are now. And nobody else wants in the game, it seems like. And so we end up with we don't have the wisdom of each generation having worked to build something that then leads the nation as a whole. And it's futility. Okay, enough on that. The vanity, look at verse 24 of chapter 2. I wanted to point that out. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. That to be able to live and enjoy life, to enjoy the work of your hands, the fruits of your own labor, to work hard and to experience the benefit of it. That's a good thing. That's something worth passing off to others. That's a blessing from God. I think the work that God gives Adam and Eve, and especially after the fall, making it harder for them, that they'll need to work harder, I think is actually God's blessing to them. It's the best thing that He can do for them. The worst thing that God could have done for them in their fallenness was to add to their fallenness idleness. There's Grandma's old saying, right? Grandma's proverb, the idle hands are the devil's workshop. You've heard that before. And we again see a generation with too much time on our hands. And it doesn't produce good things. The more ease we have, the more trouble seems to come with it. And yet at the same time, we don't want to think in terms of a transactional relationship with God. Work hard, do the right things, and that's where blessing and fulfillment comes from. Ecclesiastes does warn us of the other side of that. That you can work hard and you can do the right things, and yet we are broken people in a broken world. And trouble will come. Such that even if we are determined to work hard and do the right things, we desperately need our Savior. We desperately need His hand. So Ecclesiastes can come across certainly as a kind of a discouraging book, but it's a good outlook on life without God. That really does push us back to. And he arrives there at the end as well, doesn't he? As exploring more of the futility of seeking to control life in the midst of all its various seasons. And in chapter 3, a time to be born, a time to die, to plant, to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up. And how do you know what time it is? Maybe you're building and you should be breaking. And how do you know? Well, that pushes us back to Proverbs, actually. Proverbs will help us to know when to build and when to pluck up. A time to plant and a time to uproot. When's a time to weep and when's a time to laugh. There's a need for wisdom, a wisdom to understand the time that I'm in and what's appropriate here. What gain has a worker from his toil? Verse 9, I've seen the business that God has given the children of men to be busy with. He's made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into men's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. There's much that God is and has done that is beyond us. Nothing better than to be joyful, to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to us. Whatever God does endures forever. He hasn't given up in awareness of God. He's just describing the futility of life on our own terms.
It seems like Ecclesiastes is one philosophical argument, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
It builds throughout, and the reasons why it can build upon are explained, and there are contrasts in there, which is a little anecdotal, but it's got it's going somewhere, it's a purpose.
Yeah.
And if you don't read the last chapter.
Yes. It's a philosophical argument, and it's going somewhere. And in all of this aspect of what we think ought to matter, what we think ought to make a difference, and yet life's hard, and then you die. And so, well, what is the purpose of any of this then? And he grabs hold of that when he says in chapter 12, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. That there's something about knowing God and walking with Him. And Solomon had left that long ago, and he cannot go back. He's a man who's old, and he cannot make himself young again. But he can pass the warning to others. And it's interesting, actually. We're hesitant to share our weaknesses and our failures with others. And we don't think that's much of a model for the younger generation. But what if it is? Well, what if it is helpful for them to know, you know, I've done some stupid things. Let me tell you a couple of them. Let me tell you how and if we take those, not just, oh, that was a mistake I made there, but what was I trying to do? How was I trying to find fulfillment? Because most things that we pursue, that we later look back and say, that was foolish, I should not have done that, that was destructive, and yet we were trying to get something. We were trying to grab hold of something in so doing. We thought, we believed a lie that that would do something for us, even though it was foolishness, even though it was futile. And if we were able to unpack some of that experience of life to the youth in our lives around us, that might be beneficial to them. That this is what I was going after. And this is what it cost me. I thought I could find it these ways, and yet it didn't deliver. And oftentimes we just put it in terms of, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that in it. But what was I trying to get? Because they're hungering for the same things. That's the thing. If we just focus on behavior rather than the hungerings of the heart, what the behaviors are trying to fill or achieve, probably somebody spitting in the parking lot. Yeah. What are they trying to achieve? Don't they know that it's futility? Let's invite them in and talk about it. Yes. Yeah. But you'll have the same thing on snowy days. You'll have the same circles out front here as well. I'm just glad nobody in the last many years has taken out one of the light poles. I think the concrete base would make that painful. Ecclesiastes and the conclusion. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing, studying, and arranging many proverbs with great care. That points us back towards the Proverbs and Solomon again. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making of many books there is no end, and of much study is a weariness of the flesh. Now there's the high school student's motto. Of much study there is weariness of the flesh. I thought that maybe should be our tagline for BP Academy. So what do you do with that? Of much study there is weariness of the flesh. Is that a reason to forsake study?
You talk about spirit there, Eddie. And did say that in the study's going to, you just get tired, physically tired, whatever you did. And but your spiritual self may be enlightened.
And in contrast to the flesh, in verse 13, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. And that can sound kind of negative, that he's simply saying that you're going to stand before God. You're going to have to answer. You're going to be judged for everything you've done. So you don't want to get in too much trouble when you get there. But what if when he says, God will bring every deed into judgment? Every secret thing, whether good or evil. What if it's a good thing to have good work judged by God as good, as well done, good and faithful servant, surrounded by futility and weak in your own flesh, and yet you trusted me and you kept in my way. You continued to follow me. Even when you strayed, you turned back again. You yielded to my call and my voice, and you came back home. And you had to do that a few times, and yet you did. What if that's how God judges what is good? And then again, any reward that we would get out of that, it's all of grace. Because any good that comes out of our life is going to be his working within us, graciously bringing us to himself. But Solomon would tell the next generation, don't try it the way I did. Rather, stick to the basics. Fear God, trust him, keep his commandments, follow his ways. We are human, he is God. He is the one who will judge us and reward us accordingly, whether for good or for evil. So Ecclesiastes really speaks to the ambition of man. Maybe we can think about it that way. The ambition of humanity. We want to make something of ourselves, and that is futile. Maybe Ecclesiastes pushes us back toward the grace of God. Maybe covenantally, that's why I would suggest that there's a corrective here to thinking of the covenant relationship with God as simply a transactional relationship. If I do what God wants me to do, God will give me what I want to get out of life. And that, I think, is too cheap of a version of God's covenant relationship with his people. That God wants us to know him and to walk with him. Even in the midst of this brokenness, even when it doesn't seem to make any sense and doesn't seem to get us what we want. Though he slay me, Job says, what? Yet will I trust him. Yeah. Yeah. Ecclesiastes, any other thoughts? Now, if we move that one aside, we come to the Song of Songs. Oh, here's the reference I wanted to give you from the book. Old Testament Survey, Dyer and Merrill. That's Charles Dyer and Eugene Merrill. And that was a Thomas Nelson publication in 2001. So that's the book I was talking about. This is the Song of Songs. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Now the Song of Songs has a couple other names. What are they? What else do we know this book as? Song of Solomon. Okay, what else do we know it as? Think Latin.
You're asking a lot there.
Canticles. Songs. Canticles. So think of liturgical songs or liturgical chants. Canticles. So songs. It's a series of songs, a series of episodes, a series of acts in a play. Think of this like a dramatic production. Think of a musical love story. That's the Song of Solomon. It's called the Song of Songs because it's the best of songs. When the Hebrews would like to emphasize something, they would just say it a second time. You come across in Genesis, dying you will die. And that's a repetition, that's a strengthening. It means you will surely die. You will absolutely, without any doubt, die. It's a way to emphasize or to put it in bold by repeating the same thing. And so the Song of Songs is the best song. And I think this is the best song not because of its own composition of the various acts, but because of its theme, because of its topic. So what is the Song of Solomon about? Is this about marital love? Is this about a man and a woman, or is it something more than that? There have been a lot of suggestions. People would suggest that this is about God and Israel, that this is about the church as the bride of Christ, that it's meant to be an allegory. What would you say? I think of Stanley Toussaint, one of my professors who wrote along the margin of my master's thesis at one point, fanciful interpretation. Yes. The thing is, I still think I'm right on that point. And yet I searched the shelves of the library and I could not find one commentator, or other scholarly work that made such a comment as I had come up with on my own brilliance concerning that one passage. And so either I was going to have to defend it all and write an extended appendix in order to defend my own point. It was much easier in my master's thesis to just leave the point out. Fanciful interpretation, he said. Another way of saying, well, where did you get that? And when it's a master's thesis, nobody cares what you think. They don't care that you know what other people think. And so if I couldn't find somebody else who thought so, it didn't matter. But in terms of an allegorical approach to the Song of Songs, it's just you have to bring that in. There's nothing in the book at all that causes anybody to read it that way. We sometimes go there because this is a spiritual book. This is the Bible. This is God's revelation. And what's all this sex talk going on in here? I mean, this is embarrassing. But it would be a little more embarrassing if we're trying to reconcile, what does this kind of discussion, how does that relate to our relationship with God? I mean, men have a hard enough time thinking through this analogy of the church as the bride of Christ anyway. That has some hindrances for us, but we understand that that is an analogy. That's different. And so the Song of Songs is, yeah, it's a love story. And it's meant to portray in a beautiful way, in a pure way, the very descriptively and yet poetically, so not vulgarly, but in detail, the physical attraction and relationship that is right and proper and well and healthy in a loving marriage, covenantal relationship. And this covenantal relationship of marriage is intended to be, yes, a parallel by which we understand something of what it is to be in covenant relationship with God as His own. God seems to use more fully the analogy of we as His children, but in the Old Testament He does refer to Israel and the prophets as His bride. And that when she was young, and he chose her, and he put His garment over her and covered her. He made her His own, and he made her beautiful, and He did all these things for her. And yes, she took all that He had given, and then she went and found her other lovers. That imagery is common in the Old Testament. But Song of Songs is meant to describe the relationship between a man and a woman. It's a love story. And it's sometimes hard to keep track of who's saying what when. A lot of study Bibles will now sort of make their choices of breaking that down for you to try to follow the conversation back and forth, who's saying what when. And I provided an outline for you in that in 6 acts. There's a scene 1, scene 2. There's the expression of one and then another. Sometimes it's between the two lovers. Sometimes it's between one or the other and others who are around. But it's a fairly simple play in that. It's a dramatic production that is meant to tell a story, and it could be reflective of an actual love relationship of Solomon. I think I would put this again relatively early in Solomon's reign. Some people want to make some suggestions. Again, we don't really know. We don't know who the Shunammite is. The Shunammite or the Shulamite. Look in, well, where is she identified as the Shulamite? Where does that first come up?
She talks about her dark skin.
Yeah, she does seem to have dark skin, and we're not sure, is she more of an Ethiopian to African descent, or is she rather just, she's been in the fields, and so she is well tanned, which in circles like this, that's not necessarily considered beautiful.
No, it's considered lower class.
Yeah, you have to be out in the sun working in the fields. You're not sheltered in the shade and in the house all day long. Yeah, a very fair complexion is actually to be desired. There's some all through here in my headings in my Ryrie Bible. It talks about the Shulamite and then the Solomon and so forth. But somewhere in here she is identified. 6:13. Thank you. Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon you. Why should you look upon the Shulamite as upon a dance between two armies? So it's been suggested that she is from some place that we don't know where it is called Shulam. Could be a town or village, or from not Shulam but Shunem as well. We're not exactly sure where that would be, however. Some want to suggest that actually she's from Jerusalem or Jerusalem. So that she's actually Jerusalemite. And there are these daughters of Jerusalem that are also participating in the story. So that would make a little bit of sense. Some others would say, actually this is just a name for her, or perhaps his name for her. It's a feminized version of Solomon, which means peace, and her name is Peaceful. It could be as simple as that. We don't really know. What we do know is there's a man and a woman in the story, and they have desire for one another. And in the midst of this expression, sometimes the chronology is a little awkward as well. but they are expressing their desire for one another and how it is that they came together. And then there's a bit of tension. There's conflict that emerges. There's a resolution. There's more conflict that emerges than there's resolution in return. First he's gone, and then he returns, and then she's gone, and then there's they're together again, and so it expresses not only the beauty, not only the desire, the strong attraction, and the attraction is described both in terms of character as well as physical beauty, but there's a chemistry here, isn't there? There is a strong chemistry between the two of them, a physical chemistry. And it's described in really very graphic and yet tenderly poetic ways. These are words that you could use with one another. Not outside your own couple's relationship, but you could use some of this terminology with one another. You could have some fun with it. You will blush, and that will be fun. What does a story like this, with its details, what does it tell us about a husband and wife, the relationship that God has given us? What does it tell us about marriage?
God intended something very wonderful for us.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It's a blessing. We are meant to enjoy this relationship together. And men often don't understand women, and women don't understand men, or the wife doesn't know what the husband's thinking, the husband doesn't know what the wife's thinking, and there's these uncertainties about the other. And in a book like this, we hear from each, and we're reminded that we're different, and yet we're not so different. There is this strong longing for one another. There is this strong value of the other, a desire for them, but a care and a valuing of them that puts them first or more valuable than oneself. That is a good, healthy expression of marriage. What else do you learn out of Song of Solomon? You learn there's attraction, there's physical attraction.
We use the term sister in places.
Okay.
That's kind of recognizes something bigger.
And there's another relationship as well, that it's not just a physical attraction. That there's a friendship relationship. There's a friend-family relationship between the two as well. Yeah. Okay. Some have suggested, because there's a mention, I think it's in chapter 6 as well, in verse 8, there are 60 queens and 80 concubines, and virgins without number. My dove, my perfect one, is the only one of her mother, pure to her who bore her. The young woman saw her and called her blessed, the queens and the concubines also, and they praised her. So some want to suggest, because of the kind of language that is used here between the husband and the wife, the man and the woman, that surely this must be Solomon's first love. That surely she must be the one that he really, truly, with his heart, fell for. Even though he has all of these wives and concubines, he has all of these political marriages as well. And yet, surely she must be here first. And yet, he talks here that there are others. And yet, none compare to her. And that's a part that we don't really understand. Because we don't get Solomon. We don't understand Solomon. When he talks about 300 wives and 700 concubines. We don't understand that. It doesn't make any sense. How could that even be relationally possible? I mean, the average person cannot even maintain friendship relationships with 300 people, not to mention 1,000. And then to claim to have any kind of a marriage relationship with 300, it's just simply not humanly possible. So we don't make sense of that. And yet, even within the political realities of the relationships that occurred nation to nation through the marriages from one ruler to another, and this daughter to that son, and those kind of relationships, there's something special and different about this one. So whether it's the first relationship, some would, because of that, they want to say, and maybe we want to idealize. Maybe we want to idealize, and so we'd say, oh, well, this was Solomon's, the Shulamite was actually probably the daughter of Pharaoh. This is probably Solomon's first marriage before any other. Well, we don't know that. And actually, chapter 6 sounds at least a little like probably not. And yet,
It was a political marriage.
yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, it's its own very intriguing story.
The daughter of the Pharaoh probably would be thinking about herself a lot.
Yeah.
That's what she's learned growing up.
Yeah. And yeah, it's actually its own puzzle because nobody knows why Pharaoh gave his daughter to be married to Solomon. Because pharaohs didn't do that. That was unique among the pharaohs of Egypt. They did not give their daughters away to non-Egyptians. No, they treated their daughters much better than that. They were not part of bargains. And yet, in the transition from one king to another, David, the great warrior, the conqueror, the builder of an empire, has died, and Solomon is on his throne. And when the young son takes over from the wise father, that's the time when the surrounding powers that had been subject, now they stretch their wings. And Pharaoh apparently stretched a little too far and underestimated Solomon and got caught, and ends up giving Solomon Gezer and his daughter in buying his own way out of it. That seems to be what happened. So that's its own puzzle, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there was this wonderful... Some suggest, actually, the Shulamite... Do you remember the young woman who was David's last attendant? She was, if I could put it this way, David's bed warmer. But there were not any relations between them. And the scripture is clear on that. And yet Solomon's brother asks Bathsheba if she would do this one thing for him. What one thing? Oh, just one thing. I'm not asking much. Could I just have this woman, who happened to be the last woman who was in bed with King David, could I have her for my wife? And Solomon understood that he was making a claim to David's throne through marrying the last woman who had shared a bed with David. That's what he was doing. That's what the brother was doing. And some would suggest, actually, there's another dynamic to the story, that Solomon also had eyes for the woman. That Solomon wanted to marry her. That's part of the reason he didn't want her given to his brother instead. The true love of his life that his brother would steal away in a political deal with his mother to try to buy peace. Interesting dynamics that work out in royal families, and we can't really know. But in the midst of all of those, why do I bring any of that up? Solomon's marriages have to be a sticky wicket. They have to be kind of a mess anyway. And as broken people in a broken world, to some extent, ours will be too. And there are failings in marriage. And then there is another marriage or a remarriage. And yet, in the midst of that mess, marriage can still be what God intends for it to be for us. A sweet and beautiful and wonderful relationship that we truly are blessed by and enjoy the pleasure of and companionship with another, that we are closer to, that we adore more, and who adores us more than any other. And that's what's described here. And so that's something to press for, to shoot for within marriage. Marriage is meant to be beautiful. And we are learners of it. We are learners in it. But we should continue. We should press into that. And time given in valuing our marriage. And I think of my own experience. And it's easy along the way to come to the point that, yeah, we're good. Life's good. And to kind of take a little bit for granted, get into habits and routines and the busyness of all the other that needs doing. And yet there's something about this kind of a celebration, the conflict that arises, the tensions that emerge, the misunderstandings and the assumptions. And a lot of times the language of the story that's used, you wonder, wait, where is she going? What is she doing out on the streets at night with other young men trying to find her beloved? What is she actually doing? And it's meant to be a little ambiguous in order to cause us to wonder and to realize the messiness of it, and yet they're returned together again. And that's in the midst of the stuff, in the midst of the imperfections of this broken life, as Ecclesiastes describes all too well, that it's not as simple as Proverbs might make it seem. And yet, one of the best gifts we can have, that we can then also model for our children, one of the greatest delights I think we would want for our children to have as well, is a blessed marriage. And have that repeated in the next generation. And Song of Solomon just shows us a glimpse of that and how marriage can be, that we can press after it. How does that relate to then the covenant? As we've talked all the way through the Old Testament, this is about God's covenant with His people. So what does Song of Solomon tell us about that? As I said, the prophets so often use negative examples of unfaithfulness in marriage as illustrative of this is what Israel has done in her relationship, her covenant relationship with God. So what does Song of Solomon offer for us? How about this? As good as marriage can be, and it can be really good, it can be delightful, and as good as marriage can be, not in the same exact ways, but our relationship with God, our life with Him, our shared joys with Him can be good like that. It doesn't have to be how the prophets describe it. It can be sweet and joyful and good. That's God's desire, actually, for His relationship with His people. And we will put a pin in it there for tonight. And we'll have to come back and pick up Lamentations so that Forrest does not remain so sad. All right, let's close in prayer. Father, thank you. Lord, thank you for the gift of marriage tonight. Lord, we each have experienced it and are grateful for tasting something of love, which you want us to know in this loving relationship with the one that you've given us and given us to. Lord, thank you that you love us, that you desire to also be in relationship with us. Not merely a transaction relationship of these are the right things that we're supposed to do, but as a father loves his children, as a husband loves his bride, so you love us and desire for us to know the joy of relationship with you. Thank you for that, Father. And Lord, continue to draw our hearts close to you as we see you in your word, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.